Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. We're really at a unique point in the county's history. The reason and that's not just a rhetorical statement. It's just an objective fact, because there's several different things that are all happening at the same time. And as folks in the public sector that have a responsibility to make the right choices, it's just an opportunity. It's not guaranteed that anything will happen as a result of all those things coming together at the same time. Now, what are those things? Well, first you have, it's undeniable that there are a lot of pieces in place economically to really start making some real progress. And again, that's not cheerleading. If you talk to people that do development across the country, they'll tell you that the dialogue about the Cleveland area is different than it was a few years ago, because we just happen to have a lot of projects that are coming online at the same time, not just in the city of Cleveland, but particularly in the downtown area, but across the county. So that's an opportunity to do something, and it's happening at the same time. It's hard to swim against the tide economically. So if you have projects, and you all know this because you've had projects in your city, I'm sure, in your cities, in townships that were stalled when the economy started tanking in people say 2008, but really, as we all know, it was really before that. The difficult decisions that had to be made with municipal budgets really started back in 2006 and 2007, because we know that our tax revenues were flattening out even then. Lending was even getting tough then. But certainly by 2008, funding dried up. So if you have a lot of projects that are on the drawing board, but the national economy isn't cooperating, they're not going to happen. We're lucky, and it was mostly luck. We're lucky that there were a lot of big projects that were on the drawing board, some of whom just got in under the wire when the financing hadn't dried up yet in 2008, but it was too late for them to stop. So they continued to go forward, and what it means now is they're coming online at exactly the right time. Now we have a lot of other projects that are in the pipeline, and now that things are starting to pick up again and capital is starting to loosen up again, our timing is very, very good. At the same time that happened, you have a new county government that's been in office almost a couple of years now, and that was really just fortuitous. I mean, that wasn't planned either. But it happened, even though there'd been a discussion about it for about 100 years, but it happened literally, but it happened right at the right time, because now we're in place to try to take advantage of that economic opportunity. And then you have all of the different municipal leaders in all 59 communities, and you have a very forward-looking group of municipal leaders that realize that they have to do things differently, and that wasn't always the case. And so you have all those things happening at precisely the same time. Now we just have to take advantage of the situation. So I just want to talk, first of all, I want to thank you for taking a risk on behalf of your cities to do that, because and I say this as a former municipal elected official. I was a councilman in Lakewood for 9 years and mayor. The easiest thing to do is just what you've done before. There's a lot of mistrust within the county and between different cities, a lot. There weren't a lot of discussions about how the economic future of one city was directly tied to another city. There were some discussions, but there weren't enough. And I mean, as I look across the room, I know a lot of you have been participating in these development discussions for decades. Now, there were examples of cities cooperating, but there had never been any kind of joint economic agreement across the entire county, ever. Now there are ways that I might have suggested that the agreement, the business attraction and anti-poaching agreement, there are suggestions that I could make to strengthen it or change it, and I'm sure many of you could make some of those same suggestions. But maybe the most important fact was just that it was signed, that it was drafted and assigned and agreed upon, and that hadn't happened before. So now there's an opportunity to figure out how it's working, if it's going to work, how is it going to work, are there ways to improve upon it, and what kind of role can the county play vis-a-vis the various cities. it's really, I think, just tremendously important because it's taking a regional conversation and it's making it real. Some of you might have heard me say this before, but the problem with the discussion about regionalism in Northeast Ohio was there weren't enough practical steps for what regionalism was going to be, at least on a large scale. So most of the regionalism you saw would be, let's say, a mutual aid agreement between some fire departments, or a sharing of services for some road maintenance or something of that nature. But in terms of actually trying to get 59 communities on the same page, there really wasn't anything there. And we realized that even early on because we knew that when we first started convening different players in economic development from across the county, that a lot of them had never really spoken to each other. They'd kind of dealt with each other as competitors, but they had never dealt with each other as cooperative partners. So that's really important to set that precedent. Now, what is the county trying to do to, besides the fact that we drafted the agreement and asked people to sign on to it? I'm sure Larry got into this a little bit, or he will, but I just want to mention a couple things that we're doing. And first, just to set the table, as it were, the county government didn't get any new powers to enforce regionalism or shared services on counties, and that was something, I mean, we all here know it, but there is an expectation from the public maybe that the county had additional powers. As county executive, we don't have, my office doesn't have any real additional powers than the county commissioners did. It's just more consolidated, and then that consolidation allows us to move a lot more quickly and in a lot more coordinated fashion, and we're able to, I think, outline a vision and then try to get people on board with it. Very difficult with 10 or 11 different county elected officials. So I just want to mention a few things that we're trying to do in terms of coordinating services. And I think it's important to know, some of these are not going to be specifically economic development issues, but it's really impossible to divide these different services. You really can't divide a human services strategy entirely from an economic development strategy, or a safety strategy from an economic development strategy. A lot of these things are related to each other. What's important, I think, and this is where we get to kind of the local political challenge, is the reason that I think that our approach is practical and you're starting to see real results from it is what it doesn't ask cities to do. It doesn't ask cities to give up their sovereignty or their independence. And if it did, I think it would have. I know it would have fallen right on its face, because it's actually an advantage to Cuyahoga County. The fact that we are not one big kind of amorphous generic county with no individual cities and no individual personalities and different kind of flavors and cultures within, that is actually an advantage. There's an advantage to having kind of that kind of focused branding of what a community is. It's also an easier way for people to be involved in their community and have an identity with their community. We talk sometimes to people from other counties. They say they have real difficulty getting their residents to really identify with a giant metropolitan area. That can be difficult, but the individual cities can be a strength in that a person that's a resident of Richmond Heights or Orange, they know who their public official is. They can walk down to City Hall. They can have direct contact. They feel like government isn't so far removed. It isn't some big centralized operation that they don't have any control over. That's important. If they're involved in a civic organization like Kiwanis or a PTA or whatever, they're going to see in a very tangible way the results of their civic activism. That's very, very important, I think. So we need to preserve that. And just politically, people aren't going to give that up because many of our cities have been around for over 100 years. We are protected under the Ohio Constitution by home rule, and we're not going to give up those rights anyway. So to have this discussion as if there's just going to be one centralized government and one centralized bureaucracy was not a practical discussion, even though you could make an argument that perhaps that would be the most efficient use of tax dollars. So what you had was you had this concept out there that it was all going to be centralized, And then you had the reality, which was it wasn't centralized and it wasn't on a path to being centralized. And so what you just had this kind of endless loop of conversation, which maybe some people found interesting, but it wasn't practical. So what we're talking about doing is some very practical things. I just want to mention a couple of them, now I'll turn it back over to Larry. First of all is this agreement where we're having discussions about economic development with all of you. And we're having it with more partners than we ever have before. And by the way, it's not just the city representatives. The other thing that we've done is we've started having dialogues about economic development with our community development corporations. So we've had, for the first time, all the community development corporations across the county have been convened by the county. That hadn't happened before either. What was important about that, too, was that they had their own economic development plans. So it was kind of like everybody had their own plans, but there wasn't any kind of sense of how they were fitting together. And there's a real opportunity for us to help in that area as well. So what are the other services that we're talking about doing? It is impossible to separate what we're doing on the economic development side with what we're trying to do with shared services and regional providing of services. So there's a few things that we're doing that we're going to be rolling out as time goes on. Our model is basically that each year we'll try to roll out 1 or 2 additional services that the county can provide. And cities can contract with us or not contract with us as they see fit. So, for instance, the county, as I stand here today, the county is providing more health insurance services to more cities in Cuyahoga County than we ever have before. And some of you, your cities participate in it. But that's something that we made a decision internally that we were going to try to market that more and offer it to more people because we get some economies of scale in terms of negotiating with some medical providers and our plan through Metro and some other advantages that we have. So that's happening more than it's ever happened before. Our IT services, for the first time, the county has a centralized IT department. We have a chief information officer for the first time in the history of the county. And we have a lot of capacity and a lot of expertise to do IT services. And we're doing that for more cities, again, than we ever have before in the history of the county. Now, there's already a lot of other services that the county already does in one way or the other, whether it's public health services or whatever it might be. But we're going to keep looking at expanding things. So we're talking about expanding into road maintenance. We're talking about expanding into some things that we're doing with public health. Some of you are members of our Health Alliance. We have 21 cities now that have signed up with the county's Health Alliance. Again, this is a policy area that individual cities were sometimes going it alone, but we've put together this coalition of our healthcare institutions in the county and now 21 cities. We started out, by the way, only believing that 10 cities would sign up for it, and we ended up having 21 that ended up being interested in public health, a public health strategy. Again, it's a coalition of cities that want to do this. Now, we have certainly had cities that really aren't very interested in this dialogue. We were at 45 cities before today that had signed on to the business attraction and no poaching agreement. We've got 2 more that I think it will be official. We'll be at 47, I think, shortly. We just had 2 more councils that signed on, and their mayors have indicated they're going to sign the agreements. So then we'll be at 47. That's 90%, by the way, of the population of the county. But there are probably there's a few communities that for whatever reason will probably never join us in any of these efforts, and they're free to do that. What we're going to be able to do is 2 things. One is, first of all, we're going to be able to provide some financial incentives through our $100 million fund. And secondly, we'll be able to make a pretty compelling case that this just makes economic sense for cities to do. If they don't want to do it, that's fine. But providing some services, there's some services that will always be provided by municipal government, and it's going to make sense to do it that way. There will be other services that it does make sense to do through the county. And at least there'll be a choice. You'll have options as policymakers. You'll have options about whether you want to do it in-house, whether you want to do it with the county. And that's a good thing. Let me just say a couple words about the Economic Development Fund. First of all, I want to reiterate where the money came from. The money came from there was no bond issue, there was no tax levy issue. The bond issue came, or the proceeds of the bond issue came completely from efficiencies and reductions that we brought about as a result of the reform in county government, 100%. There were no service cuts. There wasn't money sucked out of some other department. I didn't take money from the cities or figure out how to hold on to more of your property taxes and then fund it. We didn't do that. It was all funded out of the county's general fund, and then we ended up dedicating a certain portion of it to the $100 million fund. Many of you probably know this, but there is no other county in Ohio that's doing this. Second place is not close. Let me put it this way. There's plenty of counties that have economic development programs. There are no counties in Ohio that are funding it anywhere close to this level. As a matter of fact, the amount of funding that we're putting into it is greater than all of the other counties in Ohio, all 87 counties, other counties combined. Because as you know, you're professionals in the field, that assistance has generally come from cities and from the state. The county has been a participant, but has been a rather minor participant. We've had some great programs, but they haven't received a critical mass of funding. So when the discussion was going on about the casino funds, it's an appropriate discussion to have, but I just want to reassure all of my friends in the suburbs is that the discussion about the casino funds and whether they're used downtown or not has to be seen in the broader context of where are we spending money overall. It's our anticipation that most of the funds from the $100 million fund, just because of the projects that are out there, are going to be spent in the suburbs. So I want to wrap it up, but I've already probably gone on too long. But I see a lot of signs of progress. We have, I think, a very rational strategy to try to continue to provide more services that we hope make financial sense for your counties or your cities. At the same time, the implementation of the $100 million fund, I think, is something that's already being watched across the state to see how it works. The initial loans, by the way, that have been made from that have a tremendous potential. We're already producing jobs in terms of the loans that we're talking about funding. We're already producing jobs at a rate of about 10 times that the county government was previously. So we're really looking forward to being a partner with you. I just want to stress again, and I had a meeting actually with some of the township trustees from Olmsted Township. I know they're here today, and it just reminded me of my final point, and that is if this is a top-down process where we're going to tell you how your city is going to develop, it's not going to work. It's not going to work because two reasons. One, you wouldn't let us do it that way, and secondly, we do not know as much about your communities as you do. I mean, there's a level of detail that you have about the potential of your local businesses and your parcels that aren't developed that we cannot match and do not have the staff. We will never have the staff to have that level of knowledge that you do. The only way this is going to work is if when these meetings happen, that they are real substantive meetings and the staff follow-up is real and it's substantive. And it doesn't mean we're always going to agree on things, because there is still going to be a certain amount of rivalry and competition, and there's a certain amount of it, as long as it's not subsidized by a bunch of scarce tax dollars, there's a certain amount of competition that is fine, that is healthy. I mean, cities want to promote themselves, there's nothing wrong with that. And they're always going to say, hey, we're the best place to do business, the best place to raise a family. There's nothing wrong with that. The only thing we're trying to get away from is when we have so much pressure on our budget because of state cuts and because of economic problems, it doesn't make sense for us to be subsidizing wealth transfers amongst cities. We're connected with each other and economically, and there's going to be some competition, but we have a lot of things in common. I just want to stress again the staff follow-up. Please let me know personally if you don't feel that your particular area's concerns are being addressed. If your development people, or for those of you that are in your development departments, if they're not having substantive conversations with our department about how we can work to expand your local economies, then this isn't working. And again, to come full circle in my comments, it's just an opportunity. You know, the residents of the county have responded so far to the political challenges the right way. We had a scandal and we changed the way we did things. Now we have an opportunity to do things differently economically, but so the door is open, but we've got to figure out a way to walk through the door, to have a balance between having a vibrant local economy and a local micro-targeted strategy, and then how does it fit in with the larger whole. We've got to get used to telling our constituents that too. I tried to do it when I was and that's just something I know most of you are not elected officials, there are a few of you that are. We've got to get used to talking about the county as an economic development zone. So, for instance, with the discussions about downtown development, I've got to ask all of you to get used to talking about downtown Cleveland like it's one of your assets, because it is. 70% of the people that work in the city of Cleveland live in the suburbs. People move to suburbs in part because of what's going on downtown. Not exclusively, but there's a connection with it. Now, it doesn't mean that all the resources need to go to Cleveland, or that it's all about Cleveland, or that everybody wants to live in Cleveland. That isn't what it's about, but it's part of it. So for those of us that live in suburbs, we say one of the great things about living in Cuyahoga County is we have a suburban quality of life, and we also have a vibrant urban area where there's certain things you can do in Cleveland that you can't do in a suburb. And we've got to get used to talking like that. It's very easy to fall back in the old pattern of saying, we're competing with whatever the suburb is next door. It's a small way to look at things. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your partnership. You didn't have to, and you did, and we thank you for it. Thanks for listening to me.